morning, good afternoon, everyone. I'm really glad to have you here. Hi, Ronan.
Hello again.
We're going to speak today about DDoS and cybersecurity attacks. I'm Julian Lehmann, the LeaseWeb CDN and Security Manager here at LeaseWeb, and we've prepared a nice agenda for you. Just a few rules of housekeeping for this webinar. The webinar will be recorded. A link to the recording and the slides from today's webinar will be emailed to you within 24 hours. And please submit any question via the question dialog box. We'll try to make this webinar a bit interactive. We'll have a question at the end, and we'll be answering all your questions that you might have. The agenda for today is with the help of our colleague Ronan to review the security trend. And he's been doing the top of the headlines every week lately, so it's very interesting to see and to step back a little bit on what are the large, big trends driving the security market. We'll as well review some DDoS issue and the difference with application layer attacks. And as LeaseWeb is hosting 80,000 servers around the globe, we are as well ourselves the target of attacks regularly, so we build some experience around it, and we will share with you some recommendations to secure your environment before the holiday season. But first, let me pass on the floor to you, Ronan, and then I'll let you start with a few reports that you have gathered and on trends as well in this market.
Thank you, Julien, and welcome to the webinar again, everyone. So clearly one of the nightmares before Christmas for companies who rely on the internet heavily, either for their brand presence or to make money, is the threat of disruption from things like DDoS attacks. And 2016 has not, unfortunately, gone without remark in this area. We've had some of the world's biggest DDoS attacks recently. Attacks continue to intensify and become more frequent. And we're going to talk a little bit about DDoS attacks today. We're also going to talk about data breach attacks. So these are the two key things that those of you on today's call who are looking to protect your websites and web applications from cyber threats, as you'll see in a few seconds, are the most commonly used attack vectors. Just before I go on, I think we're going to make this a little bit interactive. That's all right, Julien.
Yes.
I want to launch a quick poll specifically around DDoS attacks. So would you mind launching that? So in the last 12 months, this is completely anonymous, by the way, how many times or have you suffered from a DDoS attack or more than one DDoS attack? I'll give you another 15, 20 more seconds on that.
I think that's nice to make it more interactive. Webinars are usually one-way information that we think actually a two-way information is more useful, and we want to understand if what we see is actually reflecting your reality as well.
Indeed, and just to actually reinforce that point, Julien, if you have any questions you want to ask us, we're very happy to take those questions. Your lines are, however, muted, but if you type your questions, we will see them and we will answer them as best as we can at the end of the webinar.
Okay, let's see the answer.
Okay, so it's good that a lot of you have not had a DDoS attack, but about a third of you have suffered a DDoS attack in the last 12 months. And as we're going to find out today, DDoS attacks are very much a business continuity and a business risk issue, as well as a security and an IT issue. So they are very serious, and we're going to talk today about how you can put particular countermeasures in place to protect against them. Let's start firstly by looking at some research that's actually published by the networking company Verizon. It's published annually. It's quite an authoritative piece of data because they survey about 60 of the leading security vendors in the marketplace and get their feedback and input on what they're seeing in the marketplace. If you can see on screen, the little grey, oops, a very sensitive keyboard there. The little grey bars are the measurement point for each of these categories this time last year. So as you can see, most of these category areas, these essentially threat vectors, have declined in the last 12 months. However, 2 of them have increased substantially. So one of them is denial of service, or DDoS attacks, where the bar last year was here, and web application attacks, so attacks on websites, transactional websites, and other kind of web applications, portals, etc., have increased substantially. So we're going to talk a little bit more about this. So these are successful data breach attacks. Obviously, a data breach is where a malicious actor is able to penetrate the code of your website or your web application and essentially compromise, steal, even change data either in your web application layer or more increasingly in connected databases. And they are an order of magnitude more serious in terms of cost to your business, and certainly in the United States and in the European Union, in the next 12 months we're going to see a whole raft of new regulations and legislation that will make this a lot more serious if your customers, partners, and other third-party data, even employees, by the way, data is stolen or in an unauthorized manner exfiltrated from your site.
Exactly. So if we had made the same surveys about have you been victim of an application layer attack, even if you would have said no, that you would not be sure, because you never really know if you have been stolen your data or not. And we see a lot of time that the victims of the attack didn't even know that they were stolen their data.
Indeed. Hannah, maybe we could launch actually the second poll. We actually have a poll, so why don't we ask you, the audience. So in the last 12 months, have you suffered from any data breach attacks? And again, this is completely confidential. We can't see who is responding to these.
If you say no, you are very confident with your IT suppliers and your infrastructure, because it's very difficult actually to be absolutely sure that you've not been victim of a data breach attack. Then let's see the result.
Okay,
I don't want to influence the result, but
exactly. I think that's good. Thank you, Hannah. Okay, so about a quarter of you have suffered some kind of data breach in the last 12 months. 60-odd% have not, but as expected, over 10% of you don't know, or I'm not sure. And this is kind of the point that we're going to make in a couple of slides' time, that even the best in the industry find it extremely difficult to detect when they are being targeted, and if they have been targeted, when they are able to identify that their data has been stolen. And in many cases, in fact, it's not the company, the victim company, that is notified, but in fact, organizations downstream, like payment process organizations, credit card companies, etc. So if we look at if we assume that web applications are easy targets, which they are, by the way, and they're increasingly seen by cyber criminals as an easy way to either disrupt operations or indeed to get to data in databases where maybe network firewalls are deemed to be more difficult to penetrate without being detected, certainly. Website code and transactional web application code generally is full of vulnerabilities. And this chart here is showing you that, in fact, the most commonly used methods for getting to the data that you hold, that in many cases is really not your data, it's customer, partner, employee data, are things like SQL injection attacks, where people are trying to get to SQL databases by injecting code into something as simple as maybe a search dialog box in a website. Defacement. We saw some very embarrassing examples of this during the Olympics in Rio this year, where the Australian Swimming Federation's website, which was, I believe, hosted on a WordPress platform, where the /admin page of that website, and many, it's not just WordPress, by the way, many content management systems have /admin pages, and in this case, the malicious actor was able to preempt or guess the user credentials for the administrator and decided to publish very different news to what the Australian Olympic team wanted to present to their public. And of course, DDoS and targeted attacks are there as well. So we're going to address some of these on today's webinar. Again, if you have any questions, please jot them down, write them in the question dialog box, and we will queue them up for answering in a moment. Julian, do you have a question?
No, I just wonder, who are the victims of those attacks, and I see on this graph that really no one is immune from getting attacked. All the sectors. I mean, I think earlier we were under the impression that only a couple of sectors were the victim of those attacks, like government agencies, organized association. But now we see that actually everyone is the target of an attack, and that's really a big change in the game. It's like it's not that I think that my sector is, no one is interested in me and I'm not going to get attacked. Actually, we see that all the sectors are potentially a victim of a target of an attack.
Indeed, and I think another way to look at this is, the more your business relies on the internet, either for its business, its revenue, or indeed its brand reputation, the more serious a DDoS attack from a disruption perspective is, but particularly if you hold data. And one of the questions we always ask when we deploy our cybersecurity platform at LeaseWeb is, what kind of data are you holding either in your web application or in connected databases? Because if it is the kind of personally identifiable information or financial information, and if it's stolen, then the consequences could be very dire. In fact, just literally in today's media, I see that in Turkey, a group of hacktivists or hackers have decided to launch essentially a new generation of gaming platform, except it's a very sinister gaming platform where participants of this game are awarded points and prizes, but interestingly enough, not money. It's simply kudos points, and the points are awarded for successful DDoS attacks against a target list of organizations. And they are a mixture of airlines, retail organizations, government sites, and other political parties. So we often hear in the marketplace that attackers are sophisticated state actors. We hear this all the time when we see major breaches, and I'm going to talk about a couple of these in a couple of slides' time. But what we find very often is the fact that they are not what we think they are. They're not state-sponsored, highly sophisticated, essentially cyber intelligence authorities. One attack last week was originally stated to be a very sophisticated attack and was actually subsequently found to be a disgruntled gamer. There was an attack on a UK telecom company in October 2015 called TalkTalk Telecom, very, very widely publicized around the world. And again, at the time, the CEO of that company went on to publish media saying that it was a highly sophisticated attack. I believe in the law courts in the UK, a 16-year-old kid from the north of Ireland has recently been brought before the courts in relation to that attack. So these are not necessarily always who we think they are. Sometimes they're just kids.
Exactly, because the tools available are easier than ever to perform those attacks. So there is, not only everyone is a potential target, but as well the tools available to perform those attacks are never been easier. You can just Google a couple of tools, and then you will find a couple of tools that you can rent and perform an attack on any site. It's
a super good point, and we're going to talk about that in a couple of slides' time, in fact. So one of the other very disturbing trends that we are seeing in the industry, and a number of LeaseWeb customers have contacted us in advance of being protected, where one or more internal parties receive threatening emails or letters, essentially threatening a DDoS attack on their network or their web application. in return for payment through bitcoins or other payment mechanisms. They look very credible in many cases. They can be very scary, and sometimes they're very real. So you could well have a policy of not negotiating with, let's just call them cyber terrorists, and if you're not being properly protected, then you may regret that decision. Clearly, we don't want to feed this machine, but DDoS or ransom attacks are prevalent in the marketplace. We'll maybe at the end of this webinar talk about how we can protect your sites from these kind of these threats and these attacks as well. There is a couple of questions actually. If you don't mind, we'll take those at the end of the webinar, if that's okay. But we do have your questions, so thank you very much. Again, if you do have any questions that are piquing your interest during today's webinar, please type your question and we will respond to them. So, by the way, there's not just a business continuity aspect to DDoS attacks, there's also a real risk and a cost to your business as well, both in terms of the brand impact, the cost of actually mitigating those attacks if it's an emergency, but also a whole lot of other things like your credit ratings, business risk scoring, and so on. And on average, it's about $50,000 for a small organization, and I would say a $50,000 expense that is unbudgeted is a very unwelcome expense. If you're a medium or a large enterprise, it goes into the hundreds of thousands of dollars, which again is no less welcome. And to Julian's point a couple of slides ago, here's some great examples of
DDoS Pro. Yeah, DDoS Pro is pretty famous.
Indeed. So these are, I wouldn't necessarily say off the shelf because they are in some cases available on the internet or the dark web if you know where to look. But there are many tools that are either blatant DDoS stressor tools or marketed as network traffic testing tools in some cases that are used to launch malicious and disruptive DDoS attacks against target organizations.
But the goal of this webinar is not to train the audience to do a DDoS against their own enterprise. Huh? So
absolutely. I wouldn't recommend that in any case. But these tools mean that you don't need to be a millennial board gamer teenager anymore who has a grudge against a particular brand name company with lots of technical skills. You can just simply find a site, pay a few Bitcoin, and launch an attack. It's very, very quick and easy to do. And we saw some very scary examples of this over the Rio Olympic Games also, where a couple of very famous or infamous hacker groups were promoting DDoS stressor tools to take down Olympic sites and Brazilian government related sites as well. So I mentioned at the beginning of the call, specifically relating to DDoS attacks, that 2016 had seen a huge rise in DDoS attacks. In fact, just in the last 6 weeks, we've seen 3 or 4 of the world's largest DDoS attacks happen in quick succession. There was a period of time of about 2 or 3 weeks where we had attack after attack that became bigger and bigger. One of them was very serious, an attack against the Dyn DNS network. So if you like, the junction box or signaling post, if you like, for internet traffic for many high-profile sites like CNN, Twitter, Facebook, etc. And again, at the time, the CEO of Dyn ironically went on to CNN and said, oh, this was the result of a sophisticated, potentially state-sponsored actor. And in the weeks that have passed since then, we've since read, in fact, that this really was a disgruntled gamer. So there isn't always a political motivation or even a financial one. Sometimes it's a grudge or even a kudos thing within a particular peer group's network. Some of these attacks were born out of the use of or exploiting the use of Internet of Things devices. So literally toasters, refrigerators, smart light bulbs that change color, security cameras, these kind of things. And the way these kind of attacks work is rather than, they all have IP addresses obviously, because they generally are designed to interact with a controlling mobile device or back to the original provider's servers. But in many cases they've been infected with malware that allows an attacker to recruit these devices in essentially a botnet army. And all they essentially need to do is to ping one server request at a target server. And when you have 100,000 of these or 1 million of them hitting a target server within 30 seconds, you can imagine what might happen. So on screen we can see a number of very high-profile attacks, Deutsche Telekom, in fact the German intelligence services, as well as other major hosting companies, but also countries. Liberia in West Africa was taken down about 3 weeks ago for an entire week. So an entire country was taken out. These are very serious national security kind of events in some cases.
So we see indeed that that everyone is targeted. Now the attacks are more and more sophisticated, bigger attack. They are very easy to perform. That's pretty impressive, huh?
Yeah, so you need help. I think everyone needs help to keep their sites available and to protect the data that you are holding on behalf of your customers and your partners. And sometimes the assumption is that, our ISP is going to protect us. Our ISP provides protection for DDoS attacks, so therefore we're okay. Or in some cases, our regulator doesn't necessarily regulate or inform us, so we're not really going to do anything. I would say both of these are limited beliefs, and certainly at LeaseWeb we would strongly recommend that you look at the fine print of any contracts you have with your internet service providers, because if you are targeted, the ISP's primary motivation is to protect their own network first and usually you second. So they're going to null route you or black hole you. So not only could you be the target of an attack at the worst time of your month, your week, your day, you could also be completely cut off from the internet as well by the provider that's trying to give you access to that internet. So,
exactly. So the typical rule would be, okay, ask your provider, if I am a victim, if my infrastructure is going to be the target of an attack, are you going to null route me? If this is the case, at what is the threshold at which you will be null routing me? Is there a way to mitigate that kind of behavior? Do you have a solution to protect my site? These are the typical questions you need to ask to your supplier.
Absolutely, indeed. And there are large CDN platforms out there that absorb huge amounts of traffic as well. And in many cases, some of the messaging from some of these platforms, like for instance Amazon Web Services, is we can absorb a huge amount of traffic. And as I think it happened a few years ago with an attack on a major Chinese site, some of these attacks can end up with an enormous bill because somebody has to pay for the traffic, and clearly if you're AWS, you're going to be passing that cost on to you, the victim.
So the CDN is absorbing the attack, but someone has to pay for the traffic.
Sure.
So the bill goes to the customer.
Okay, so it's fortunate from a vendor perspective, but it's very unfortunate from an end user perspective that unfortunately security, cybersecurity, and continuity issues like DDoS and data breach attacks are really not going away. For some years now, the security industry has been advising developers of software to build security into the code level of their applications and web applications. I think people are becoming a lot better at that, but disruptive DDoS attacks, as we've just seen, continue. I think the very frightening precedent that's been set with the use of extremely unsecure Internet of Things devices. We're undoubtedly going to see more of those kind of attacks in the next 12 months. And indeed, as I said before, the impact if your data is compromised and stolen, where today you may think it's a bad event, but really not materially affecting the operations of your own business. Tomorrow, through 2007, when US legislation and regulations and EU regulations come into effect, the onus is on you, the data holder, to protect that data and to prove that you have adequate protection in place. So it's going to become much, much more financially serious if you are, in fact, targeted. And I'll quickly flick through these, but generally web applications are vulnerable. They have essentially Swiss cheese holes in them because they're complex things to develop. A number of independent organizations have sprung up in the last 10 years to try and push through security initiatives to encourage people to develop better code, but also to protect sites that do have vulnerabilities. One of these is the OWASP Foundation, and every 3 or 4 years they publish vulnerabilities. And it's interesting to see that these are matching on to some of the Verizon research, like injection type attacks, SQL injection, where people are injecting some code into a site, usually into an online form, like a registration form, or
it's the contact form of the website.
Indeed, or a search dialog box or something, and instead of getting a result list from your search back, they're getting back customer records and whatever other data they're looking for. Web application firewalls in particular, but in conjunction, I would say, with frequent use of testing tools of vulnerability assessments and penetration testing, are often used to identify these vulnerabilities, but also to block and protect your site.
So if you want to say that the DDoS are easy to spot because it's a big flood of traffic and hard to block, the web application weaknesses and the web application attack are difficult to spot but easy to block just with a simple inspection.
Exactly right. And for 13% of today's visitors and attendees on today's webinar, where you don't know that you've been breached, it's a very important point to have the real management information about the health of your site. So not just the performance, which is extremely important of your site, to make sure that people don't abandon your site because the site's too slow, but also to make sure that if you are being attacked, you should know about that and reduce things like false positives and false negatives. As I mentioned at the top of the call, even the best in the world get this wrong on a fairly catastrophic level. So the financial services industry that spends even more than governments in many cases on security initiatives, 58% of them were found to have vulnerabilities relating to that OWASP top 10 list. And it's interesting to also note, which is not in today's webinar, but another piece of research that we looked at recently showed that it takes on average 90 days for a financial services organization to realize that they've been breached. So it's one calendar quarter before anyone realizes that our confidential data is potentially compromised. And this is extremely scary because if they're getting this wrong, it's extremely serious for retail, e-commerce, manufacturing, and other types of organizations. Not least, by the way, government and healthcare, where if you combine, say, a social security number with a name and address, and not even a partial credit card, but a social security number and a name and address is a very comprehensive contact record, is on the market today about $50 to $70 per record. So if you imagine that the Anthem health insurance company breach a couple of years ago with 80 million records stolen, I was talking to a law enforcement organization recently in the UK, and they made the comment that in some cases data breaches and cybercrime is more lucrative to criminals than selling drugs. And this is the unfortunate world that we're now living in. So, yeah, that is it. Many of you, by the way, come from retail, e-commerce, even other sectors, public sector, etc. And you may well be using content management platforms like the ones we've listed on screen here. It doesn't mean necessarily that you are secure. I think sometimes people think that the content management platform will provide a base level of security, and indeed they do. WordPress, in particular, Magento, publish updates and patches on a fairly frequent basis, particularly for WordPress. But that's not to say that they are not vulnerable applications, and there will be a number of zero-day vulnerabilities on Magento, and there continue to be many different published vulnerabilities in WordPress. So as Julian's going to talk about in a moment, we have some key recommendations for you to make sure that you keep these platforms healthy, but also you protect on top of these platforms to protect the integrity of your site and the protection of the data that you are holding on behalf of your customers. I think with that, I might just pass over the microphone to my colleague Julien.
Yes. So with this, this is what we see on the market. This is as well, as we are a hosting company, we are hosting all these servers on our data center that are in Europe, in the US, in Asia. So we are able to see and to get the feedback from our customers. And so we came up with some basic recommendation that we advise all our customers to follow in order to be in a more secure environment. So first, of course, the first thing when you deliver your infrastructure to your supplier, just make sure that your environment is patched and up to date. At the moment you install it, verify the open port, verify the open admin pages, verify who is the authorized personnel who is accessing those servers. So a simple check at the moment of the installation. And then once you are running these servers and when time goes on, you seem to, we see often the case that we forget to remove the authorization of personnel leaving the company. So have really an up-to-date and a continuous check of who is the authorized personnel to access and which level of access are they authorized to. And make sure that you really limit the root access to a very limited number of persons, and then all the other access are given in a very accurate manner, so that a lot of attack is coming from ex-employees. So we have to be able to be careful and cut the access to those servers when those people leave. Security patch. So of course we were speaking about the Magento and how we need to update the patch. This will not protect you from zero-day attacks. So the zero-day attacks are typically exploiting vulnerabilities that have not been patched yet. But for this, the WAF are a very efficient method to get protection. But still, as soon as the patch goes out, implement it on all your infrastructure so that you can remain on the safe environment. One obvious advice is that you should be prepared for an attack. So even if you've not, we've seen some numbers, people have not been facing an attack for more than half of the case, still you should not relax too much, winter is coming, as in the series, but having a plan to know who will be the task force, who will you call, how will react your supplier, what's the process with your supplier to react on a DDoS attack, at which level are you going to get null routed, what are the solutions that they have available in order to protect you from DDoS attack, from web application attack, how is your IP protected, how are your domain protected. These are the questions that you need to ask in advance, because after it's going to be an unpleasant time. And then what we provide as well to our customer is a vulnerability scanning. So we've seen, the attack are not only targeting everyone, they are as well constant. And people are scanning the servers constantly. And if you are able to scan your file, scan your server, scan your domain with the OWASP top 10 test, and verify, okay, these are my current vulnerabilities, this is what I need to do in order to protect my site from those attacks. Do this test regularly, I would say every 2-3 months, that's fine. Your site is depending on how often you change your site, but really verify. We can do those vulnerability tests for you. We do perform those tests very on a usual basis, and this is an important information that you can get. And then, of course, for the DDoS, so not the web application attack, but the DDoS, of course, you need to have a response strategy. So speak to your supplier about it. Integrate, a business continuity planning. If my server goes down, do I have a backup? Do I have an alternative site where I can reroute my end user? In that context, usually, for example, CDN can be a very good solution. So the CDN indeed would be able to absorb the load of a DDoS. Eventually, you could be able to reroute the traffic. So if some nodes don't respond, the traffic will be rerouted to other nodes of CDN. So using CDN is a very good way to start and to feel safer about how to absorb DDoS. Ideally, LeaseWeb has a very good CDN service, so we are happy to provide that as well for you and ensure that you're protected. Just a couple of things, just make sure that your TTL, so the time to leave of the DNS change that you're going to implement is not too long, so that in case you need to change it, in case you need to change the route of your traffic, I think if you set a TTL to 15 minutes, it's reasonable, not too long, not too short. The shorter you put it, the more load you're going to get on your origin server, but the longer you put it, then the longer it takes to implement the change. 15 minutes is a good time, and so that if ever you are getting DDoS, then you can change the route, you can change the way the CDN is absorbing the load, if you need. Of course, leverage web application firewall. I think this is becoming a new standard. The same way that you are automatically, implementing a firewall or some rules in order to protect your website, you should need you should implement a web application firewall in front of your website. You need it to be PCI, compliant. All our WAF are installed in our data center that are PCI compliant as well, so you will keep that PCI compliancy. If you don't use WAF, then you have to make sure that you follow a proper development code process so that your developer, and this is as well a very good suggestion, make sure that your developer are following the right, at least sensibilized and evangelized about the security risks that they are submitted to, and make sure that they are considering the security impact of their code before they deploy it. And then, of course, the best is to combine all of those solutions. It's like if you were, owning a castle and you need to have several walls actually to protect your castle. So CDN is to protect you against DDoS, the first absorption of the load, and making sure as well, the peak traffic and is absorbed. The WAF for the web application attack, so the layer 7, the cross-site scripting, SQL injection. And for DDoS mitigation, if your IP is getting attacked, speak to your supplier. Is he protecting his network against DDoS? Is he able to provide you a specific custom-made solution to protect your IP? Maybe usually we reroute the traffic when we detect a DDoS attack to a scrubbing machine or a scrubbing center, so that the traffic, only the legitimate traffic is arriving to your server. Those are the typical solutions that you might consider. So in summary, do an internal security audit, limit the access to authorized personnel, have an update list of the authorized personnel, patch your server, develop an emergency patch plan. This is especially for the zero-day attack. Implement and practice secure development lifecycle. So this is a secure code. You should train your developer to code in a secure manner. Create an incident response plan for security breach, a DDoS plan. So do you have a task force? Do you know what will you do if you get attacked? Maybe you will never get attacked, maybe you will, but it's better to have a plan where you say, okay, if I get attacked, I call my supplier at this number, you three will stay and help me to debug it. You are the guys in charge. Task force will be ready, and then the plan is in place, and then you can react much faster. And then be prepared with a CDN, a WAF solution, or DDoS mitigation solution, or a combination of the three. Perfect. So, of course, we can mention one of our customers named Kimia. It's an ad serving company. What is interesting with this customer, we have a couple of them, but what is interesting is the number of requests. So they are dealing with more than 100,000 requests per second because they deliver banner on others' websites. You know, they are delivering the ad banner to everyone. So it's a considerable amount of requests per second, and all of those requests needs to be inspected, you know, to identify if there is an illegitimate request among them. So we implemented a solution that is custom made, and now they are happily protected against all web application attack, and as well we inspect the traffic. If we detect a DDoS, we reroute the traffic to a scrubbing center so that they are able to deliver their ads, because ads, you know, delivering the ad is just the way they generate revenue. It's pure revenue. Every content they deliver is generating revenue. So I hope this was a good explanation of the trends, of the recommendation in order to protect your site, and we hope you found this very informative, and we thank you very much for your time with us. It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much, Rona.
Actually, just before we go, we have a couple of questions that have come through. And again, if you want to ask any questions, please do feel free to type them in the question dialog box. So one of the questions I think was relating to the point about the TalkTalk telecom data breach. There was a question about what type of data was stolen. Was it encrypted or in plain text? From what I understand, actually it was in plain text and it was real customer data. So much so that in fact TalkTalk have now spent something like £70 million. So, you know, nearly $90 million. Actually, that's probably $70 million these days. Yes. It was $90 million on the remedies as a direct result of that breach. So it's a very good point, and one thing we probably should add to the recommendations list here is that do make sure always that your data is encrypted.
Absolutely.
But nonetheless, you still have a duty of care to protect that data. There's another question about the availability of these DDoS stressor tools, and are they easy to find? And I hope the question is an innocent one, Hugo, rather than one out of active curiosity. But they're called DDoS stressors, and that's probably all I need to say. You can Google it yourself. They're extremely available on the internet. And indeed, many of these developers and providers market themselves as completely legitimate sites. And I'm only half joking when I say that we received a customer inquiry.
They market themselves as network stressor.
Yeah, indeed, and they have FAQs. What happens if my attack fails? Do I get a refund? All this kind of stuff. So, you know, these tools are, you know, when I think law enforcement finds them, they try and take them down. We have also refused protection when they've approached us to protect their site as well. So we, the provider, have a part to play in this puzzle as well. Glad to see that Hugo says it was completely innocent. Okay, you take the next one.
Yes, you mentioned that AWS passes its traffic bill to its customer in case of an attack. Does an ISP like LeaseWeb do the same? So indeed, we have developed a cybersecurity solution, and the good news is that you only pay for the legitimate traffic. You don't pay for the malicious traffic. So if you are using LeaseWeb cybersecurity domain protection service, you know, we have several packages, Pro and Enterprise and more advanced, but in all of those packages, the service is ensuring that you are only paying for the legitimate traffic. So if you have indeed a lot of legitimate traffic going to your site, then the bill might be higher than if you have a very small website, but you won't get billed for the illegitimate traffic, of course, because we learn from those lessons.
But of course, you need to be being protected by that security service, yes, otherwise you won't be billed.
Yes. I know LeaseWeb rolled out a DDoS protection system for their dedicated server. How does that fit into the picture here? So, indeed, we are hosting a lot of servers in LeaseWeb, so we are able to implement WAF and domain protection for any customer, even if his domain is not hosted with LeaseWeb. But for servers that are hosted with LeaseWeb, then they have an IP that is belonging to that is provided by LeaseWeb, and so we are we indeed launched a service a couple of already almost a year ago, where all our servers that are hosted with LeaseWeb, that are dedicated server provided by LeaseWeb with an IP provided by LeaseWeb, will get protection from DDoS attack. And the way it works is that there is a sensor at the core router of each of our data center in the world. So in all of them, there is a sensor, an inspector of the traffic, and when we detect a change in the traffic pattern going to your server, then we reroute the traffic to a scrubbing center that is able to determine if the traffic is legitimate or if it's a DDoS. And if it's a DDoS, it's going to be blocked, so that we are able to protect the servers that are hosted in LeaseWeb data centers.
We have time for a few more questions if you want to type them into the question dialog box. You're welcome. Somebody's saying thank you. So if there are no further questions, I think on behalf of myself and Julien and the LeaseWeb team that organized this great webinar today, thank you very much, and I'm sure we will talk again in the near future. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you very much. Cheers. Bye.